when I was a kid, America was a buttoned-up society. It was disciplined. It was tight. It was organized. Everybody was on message. And then in the early 60s, the Beatles came to America in 64. And then by 68, all the doors were kicked down.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I'd like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on another special guest, and this is Pastor Douglas Wilson. Welcome to the show.
Great to be with you. It's quite a privilege. Thanks.
It's an honor. Pastor Wilson, I have done a very brief intro there, but please introduce yourself to my audience.
I'm a pastor in Moscow, Idaho, and pastor of Christ Church. Moscow is up in the Panhandle, the northern part of Idaho. I've been here pastoring here for going on 50 years, close to 50 years, and that's my day job. As one of the things I do on the side is I write a lot, and I have a blog, and I've written various books. So that's who I am.
That's awesome. How did you first get into the world of preaching? Tell me a little bit about your background.
That was an interesting series of events. So I joined the Navy in 1971 and was in the submarine service, got out in 75. And my parents had moved to Moscow, Idaho, and I thought, well, I could declare residency wherever, and I'll just go to college. University of Idaho is here. I'll just go to college where my folks are, catch up with them, and then go on and do my thing. And my dad had filled the pulpit for a local church that had lost their pastor, and it was the Jesus People era, and it was a small, tiny church, like 19 members, and it ballooned up to 200 or 300 people, and that was in Pullman, Washington, and a number of people in Moscow were going over for that, so they decided to split off and plant a church in Moscow. And that was right when I got out of the Navy. I played the guitar, so I was the volunteer song leader and whatnot. As a college student, song leader, whatnot. And about a year and a half into this church plant, the man who was doing the preaching announced one Sunday that he had gotten a job in another city and he was going to be gone the next Sunday. And good luck, everybody. And and I was up front with a guitar. So that's how that happened. So I preached the next Sunday, and this wasn't deliberate or anything. It was just everything was weird because it was the 70s. And so I preached, and I started preaching, and then we had no church government or anything like that to speak of. But we gradually formed that church government, and I was accepted as an elder and a pastor, and I've been preaching to this long-suffering body of saints since 1977. So that's how that happened. We've had name changes, and it's grown. It's we've shifted doctrinally in different ways, but it's the same church.
That's awesome. What are some of those big shifts that have happened? I mean, you've seen a lot in 50 years, approaching 50 years of pastoring. The country has changed, the town has changed, the church has changed. I mean, I was born in 86. And so from 86 till now, I find it remarkable just how much society and culture have changed. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what have been some of the big shifts that you have seen over that past 5 decades?
This is there are some monumental shifts. So I was pastoring for years, over a decade, maybe approaching 20 years before the internet even happened. So it was as though I began pastoring in an old world, a post-World War II, like a post-World War II world, in terms of technology, internet, smartphones, apps. There was none of that. So when I began writing books. Probably the first book I published was in the late 80s, and when I would publish a book, there were basically 2 computers in town. One was a mainframe computer up at the university, and the other was a computer at the newspaper, big computer with numerous terminals. And if I wanted to, and then when I got my first computer, I would write something, I'd put it on a floppy disk, then I'd take it downtown, take the floppy disk downtown, and give it to a guy who had a shop down there, and he would typeset it, and I would get a roll of glossy paper with the book on it, like a scroll, and then I would take it home. This is how you'd make a book. I'd take it home and I'd cut it up with scissors, and I had a waxing machine that would wax the back of the pieces, and I'd place it on a layout sheet and assemble it all by hand, and then send the book off, right? So that's how I began making books. And now it's a matter of formatting on your computer and click off to Amazon, and it's a print on demand thing. It's that kind of thing. So the technological change has been enormous, one world and another world. But another thing that has accompanied it, and this is why I wrote my recent book, Keep Your Kids, is that I wrote a bunch of family books back in the early days of our ministry, Standing on the Promises on Child Rearing and Reforming Marriage and Federal Husband. So a lot of family books. But I was recently listening to a book, a very good book, called Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. It's just a great book. And I realized listening to that book that young parents today of little kids, like preschool kids, are bringing up their kids in a completely different environment than what we were doing. So when we were bringing up our kids, we were trying to be Christian, trying to be a Christian family and Christian child rearing in a world that was worldly and didn't have the same values and stuff. But the outside world, even though it was worldly and not Christian, was still more or less right side up. A boy was a boy and a girl was a girl, and divorce was a negative thing. And, they had certain things that were left over from a time when we had more of a Christian consensus. So we had the easier task of bringing up children to live like Christians and consistent Christians in a world where people were sinful but not demented. And Christian parents today are bringing up their children where you're not just dealing with old-fashioned sin. You're dealing with sort of a rebellion against all reality. It's like they want a bumper sticker that says "Make reality optional," and of course, reality is not optional. And in the old school, you had to equip your children. The world was hard and unyielding, and it could eat you up if you weren't prepared. And so you prepared your children to navigate the world. You taught your children how to adapt and think on the fly and stand their ground, and how you equipped your children to confront and fit with the world. Well, now the subtitle of the book is dealing with raising children in an age of therapeutic sentimentalism, and now the consensus is that the world must conform to your child's feelings. Feelings are central. If someone feels like a girl, then they are a girl. If they feel a certain way, then that's the way it must be. And everyone else must cater to that. And that's the demand. And Christians are trying to bring up their kids in a time when everything is against them. It's not just I don't accept your teaching on things like sexual morality, like promiscuity or whatever. It's I don't accept your teaching on being a creature that's made a certain way. And so this full-scale assault on reality is something that we have to learn how to deal with, and we have to find communities that will reinforce us as we are trying to complete this shared task.
If you're a fan of dystopian fiction and sci-fi thrillers, then you should check out Lucid, a new novel by writer Michael S. Milano. Lucid is a 21st century blend of 1984 and Brave New World, set during a devastating pandemic. The year is 2084, and the Pansophical Corporation protects what's left of humanity from the deadly Timbaku virus and a terrorist organization known as Praxis. After losing his wife to the pandemic and being assaulted by public safety for violating curfew, citizen Anthony Sartori begins to have bizarre flashbacks. In a culture dominated by suspicion, asking the wrong questions could put him in the crosshairs, but Anthony is determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Lucid is an exciting and timely read that cautions against collectivism, technological surveillance, and sacrificing freedom for the illusion of safety. If that's up your alley, go to lucidthebook.com and grab yourself a copy today. That's LUCID, thebook.com to get yourself a copy. Free to be safe, safe to be free. lucidthebook.com. Yeah, you've just touched on one of the major inversions that's happened, particularly over the past decade. But when you think about raising children in this modern world, what do you think are the biggest risks or dangers or concerns that parents should be aware of and watch out for?
Sure. So there are two reactions. One, there are two. I'm fond of saying there's always a ditch on both sides of the road, right? You can veer off into the right ditch, or you can veer off into the left ditch. The right ditch, and I would say the biggest practical threat to children is how wired they are. All right. So pretty much every teenager in America has a portal in his pocket or her purse to every porn library in the world, right? So they've got access to everywhere. They've got access not only to the bad side of town, but to the bad side of every town, right? And oftentimes parents are not on top of not on top of what's going on at all. So they don't know what's on their kids' Spotify playlist. They don't know what apps their kids are using to communicate with the other kids. They don't know what movies or reels are being watched. The parents just don't know. Now, some parents just sort of say, well, that's kids will be kids, and we just have to roll with it and just let the kids do whatever. That's the right ditch. That's one ditch. The other ditch is for parents to unplug everything and go live in the mountains in a log cabin. It's sort of a neo-Amish option. We are going to unplug from everything and hide away from the world. The problem with that is that doesn't work either, because wherever you go, however far up in the mountains you go, you take all the sinners with you. You take sinners with you, and you're basically trying to fight licentiousness with law, and law doesn't work. It's not a strong enough barrier to keep the world out. For that you need gospel. For that you need grace, and grace has to have a brain. It has to be intelligent. It has to be taught. So what you need to do is equip your children to interact with the world, which is going to be far more intrusive than the world was 50 years ago. The world's coming after your kids. They're not content to leave them alone, and so you have to teach them how to respond. This is the play. So this is I'm going to date myself by using this illustration, but when my kids were in junior high school level, my kids are grandparents now. Some of my kids are grandparents now, so this is a ways ago. But when they were junior high school age, MTV was just coming out. MTV was just the latest thing. And this was so far ago that MTV actually played music videos. That's something that's the way it was back then. So what I would do is I'd turn on MTV, which we're conservative Christians, and that's a worldly sort of thing. But what I would do is I'd turn on MTV, and I'd sit down with my kids, and we'd watch a music video, and then I'd turn it off. And then I'd ask my kids, okay, what was that? What were they saying? What was the worldview of that band? And the band could be nihilistic, black despair, Nirvana type stuff. It could be hedonistic. It could there were any number of options. But what I wanted my kids to learn how to do is not just consume like thoughtlessly with all the discernment of a vacuum cleaner. Just I didn't want them to just take in the gunk, but I didn't want to hide them from the gunk either, because I knew that they're going to encounter the gunk sometime, and I wanted them to be equipped when that day happened. So you protect your kids when your kids are younger from the awful stuff, but as they get older, they're going to be going out into the battlefield themselves. They're going to marry and they're going to have kids of their own, and they have to be ready to encounter what they're going to run into out there, like thinking Christians. So you can't just say, "Oh, that's a worldly band and it has a backbeat." That's not good enough. That's not good enough. You have to. The greatest commandment in all of Scripture is in Deuteronomy 6, and it is interestingly a command that is given to parents in the context of child rearing and education. So you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Well, notice in that you learn to love the Lord your God with all your brains. That Jesus adds mind when he gives us that same command. And this is in Deuteronomy 6. It's in the context of teaching your children. When you rise up, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you're having conversations around the dinner table, when you're talking to your kids in the back seat at the intersection, you're to be talking about the world in the light of God's word. And that has to be an intelligent interaction, because if you're just blowing smoke at your kids, well, that's bad because it's worldly. Well, why is it worldly? Well, because it's, I don't know, shut up. We're Christians, we don't do that sort of thing. That kind of thing is going to be deeply unsatisfying to any intelligent kid. And they see that their parents are just, blowing sunshine at them. And so there's no meat in the instruction. And so what you want to do is enable your kids to recognize what this artist is assuming, what he's standing on when he says what he says, why the things that he's saying flow from his root assumptions, and so on. And that means that when they encounter the hot new band 5 years from now that you, the parent, never heard of, they're equipped in how to do a worldview analysis. They're equipped in how to break it down and solve the problem for themselves. But you've got to. So in order to do that, you have to have thinking kids, and unfortunately, it's not possible to have thinking kids without thinking parents.
How would you modify that for a 2025 version?
Yeah, part of my problem is I can give, because here I am, aging boomer. I can give hand-on principles, and I use computers and smartphones and everything. But periodically, I will discover, a pile of unread messages that people have been sending me on an app that I didn't know did messages. What is this? So I'm not the.
It happens
I'm not
to
the
us millennials too, if that's any comfort.
If that's any consolation. I didn't know GarageBand had a messaging thing. So basically, what I would want to do is emphasize principles, but the principles would have to apply in new areas. Like what is being assumed, for example, in a world where 80% of your interaction with your friends is texting. Okay, God gave us a three-dimensional world, and we want to live in a three-dimensional world. And even if, let's say you assuming for the sake of discussion, that you got a group of high school kids who text each other all the time, and let's say in a remarkable providence, it stays wholesome. There's no cattiness, there's no savagery, there's no bullying, and there's no sexual innuendo. Let's say the kids keep it wholesome. There's still a problem with them learning to communicate in two dimensions only, right? So on the one hand, this is another topic that relates to another book I wrote called Productivity, where technology is not technology is a gift from God, and if you look up computers or software or smartphones in your Bible, you find nothing about it. There's nothing about it. But I argue that technology is a form of wealth, and wealth has a particular bias. In this fallen world, wealth has the bias, and the wealthy are tempted to forget God. That's the bias. They become self-sufficient. They become full of themselves. And if I show you my smartphone here, I've got 100,000 servants on this thing, and Nebuchadnezzar needed actually had to have 100,000 servants in order to have the things done for him that this thing will do. I need a servant who speaks Anglo-Saxon. I need a servant who carries a Latin dictionary around with him all the time. I need a servant who can give me the pitch for tuning my guitar. I need a servant who, I've got all these servants. Well, what this is staggering wealth. That's what it is. It's staggering wealth. And I have to teach my kids today how to handle wealth, right? So when I was a kid, you could, and I'm not trying to, I know how this sounds, but when I was a kid, you could be occupied all afternoon in the backyard with a couple of sticks, right? You just play with your brothers and sisters, and you played until dark, and you were playing with sticks, and that was however much fun it was, and it was a lot of fun. It was not wealthy. It was not the rich kid. It was the lower middle class kid playing with sticks. Well, even just about everybody today has these servants, has these people send messages and do things all the time, and the thing that comes in with that, the temptation that comes in with that, is self-sufficiency and entitlement. All right, self-sufficiency and entitlement. So one of the things that parents have to do is teach their children what the temptation is, and also provide them with spaces or areas where they are unplugged. You don't want a dinner table with 5 or 6 people sitting around the dinner table all looking at their phones. It should be no phones at the dinner table. That kind of thing. Or you teach your kids to you let them have a smartphone, but you don't let them have you don't let them form profiles. If you're a 12-year-old girl and you have an Instagram profile and you are depressed or exalted based on how many likes you got, there's a distortion that's coming in with that. And what happens is people curate. The last thing in the world we want to do is teach teens who are coming of age the lessons of how important it is to curate an image that's nothing at all like their actual life, right? Your actual life doesn't have filters that you can put on it. Your actual life is mundane. Your actual life, you've got to love actual people, and you've got to clean up actual dishes, and you've got to obey your mom, and you've got to do all this stuff. And that's not how Instagram functions. And so what happens is one of my sons with my grandchildren, he said, one of my gifts to you is that none of you will have a profile, right? You can't curate your life and put it out there for people to admire and applaud. That's not what this is for. At the same time, because technology is a tool and it's not inherently evil, you can see how electronic devices would drive a family apart. Everybody eats their meals over the sink, or they'll have dinner in a cursory fashion, and then everybody retreats to their bedroom to watch whatever movie they're going to watch on their computer. You can see how technology would be a fragmenting thing. But it can also, if you have a biblical worldview, it can also be something that unifies everybody. So, I've got 3 kids and 18 grandkids and some great grands. And one of the things, we have a family chat group, and we called Parliament of Owls. And we can talk to we can talk to each other all day. When I was first married, when I would go to work in the morning, I would occasionally get a call from my wife, or I'd call her at home, and the phone was this thing attached to the wall with a wire. I had to go to the phone and call her, and it was a kind of a deal. It was kind of a big deal if I called her. And now we can chat with each other all day long on the fly, or she can drive up to Spokane with one of our daughters, and they can be shopping, and they can take a photo of a dress that they could pick up for a cousin, and text a picture of it. Do you want this? People can talk all day long with one another. In other words, the technology can be used like any tool to unify or bring closer together, to serve and love one another. But that doesn't happen all by itself. It has to be cultivated. It has to be encouraged. You have to teach on it. If you just let it ride all by itself, then what's going to happen is your family ties are going to get weaker and weaker and weaker, because your kids are going to have a support group that's not related to you at all, and their friends at school are liking their post or giving thumbs up to their posts, and nobody at home does that. So that's the kind of thing. But of course, I'm just giving you the principle. I don't know all the ins and outs of some of these.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the technological shifts are truly remarkable. I mean, I've been active on social media for 20 years at this point. I remember first joining Facebook in late 2004 and being on MySpace, and then joining, I think I made my YouTube account initially 2006. And then I joined Twitter in 2009 and Instagram, I think 2010. And I'm a power user of a lot of these platforms. And when you use them a lot, you really can have the opportunity not just to achieve a lot, but to learn a lot. And one thing that just strikes me is, as you hinted at, it's just a tool like everything else. I know a lot of people, I think it's kind of trendy, particularly amongst more conservative leaning people, to sort of demonize social media, or demonize smartphones and all that. And I totally understand that. I see where that comes from. But at the same time, people have to recognize, I mean, what we are doing right now would not be possible without this technology. Just us having this conversation in HD, and then us being, I mean, I'm in Dubai. You are in Idaho?
Idaho. Yeah.
I mean, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean,
and we're here, and then we can put this online and beam it out to thousands, potentially millions of people who can also watch it from wherever they want, and they can pause it, and they can rewind, and they can share it with a friend, and so on. And so these tools and this technology, it can be used for great evil and wickedness. That's obvious. But it can also be used for great good. I mean, you can just, they're communication tools. So it's not really about what the tool is. I mean, I don't think, is a telephone good or bad? I mean, it's like, well, what is being said on the telephone, right? Is a TV screen. I mean, what's being shown on the TV screen? What's being played through the headphones? What's being played through the speakers? So I think people need to recognize that. And I think people have almost given the devices too much power and haven't quite realized that they're the ones who have the power, both on the production side, but also on the consumption side.
Yeah. Not only do they have the power, but with that power comes the responsibility. And that's the thing we don't like. So what happens is we have a reflex, self-justifying move. When something bad happens, when somebody does something terrible, there's a school shooting, we blame the guns, right? When photography was invented, it was about 10 minutes before someone thought of pornography. And so they started doing, but then you have family photos, and here's a picture of our wedding, and it's a wonderful thing. But when people blame the cameras for pornography, or they blame the guns for the shooting, or they blame the alcohol for the drunkenness, so our perennial we love to pass the buck. We're blame shifters, and the problem is under our own sternum. The problem is the human heart, and we have to learn how to receive God's good gifts. Technology is a gift of God. We have to receive it with gratitude, but we also have to receive it with a sense of responsibility to do constructive and edifying things with it, and to protect our kids from the people who are using it carelessly.
I mean, you're touching on another interesting cultural topic, in my opinion, which is the concept of responsibility, which is something that, look, I don't know how much things have changed, but it seems to me that at least in the modern Western world, there is a dislike of personal responsibility at many different levels. Increasingly, it seems to me that people don't like to take responsibility or accountability for pretty much anything. Right? I know there's that. Yeah, I know there's that natural human thing to want to sort of point the finger and make excuses and point blame. That's certainly not new. That's been going on since the beginning of time. But I just see it all over the place. It seems just increasingly difficult, and perhaps even not encouraged for people to just take responsibility and accountability. I see it at the top level. I see it amongst politicians and people in the media and people who are supposed to be leaders and corporate leaders. I see that going on, and then just amongst the general population. And in fact, if you encourage people or want people to sort of take responsibility or take accountability, you often become the bad guy. You become the bad person for pointing out, hey, that's that's not a good thing. It's like the person who notices the sin or notices the misdeed or says something about it is demonized more. That's now considered more. It's considered more sinful to point out a sin or an error than to commit one. That's essentially where the culture seems to have gone, perhaps besides some of the most egregious things that are out there.
Yeah, so you're really on point here, because making excuses is as old as dirt. So God comes to Adam in the garden and said, what happened? And he says, the woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and you gave me her, right?
Yeah.
There's three of us, God, the woman, and me, and I'm the only one who comes out clean in this, because she gave me the fruit and you gave me the woman. So we always
in there somewhere.
We've always made we've always made excuses. The thing that's particularly perverse about our era is this excuse making, and this shuffling off of personal responsibility has been transformed into a virtue. Instead of a failing that people, a common human failing that we recognize that people do, and we try to avoid it, but we sometimes succumb, right? That's the way it was before. What it is now is everybody wants to be the victim. Everybody wants to be the one that is being mistreated by the world. And so consequently, when something happens that's on your watch and it's your responsibility, you try to turn it in. Not only do you try to turn it into something that's not your fault, but you are positively virtuous because of what's happening. So when the people blame you or the people look at you, so did you really drive in that condition, or did you really? Well, people want to lay claim. They want their behavior to become a sort of a badge of honor. And so I am differently abled, or I am an alcoholic instead of a drunk. I have trauma, and everybody has to cater to me. And this goes back to what I said earlier about demanding that the world honor my victimhood. Okay? And so years ago, I was walking in a big city and happened to be I walked by a storefront, and the storefront said Center for the Empowerment of Deaf Alcoholics. And I looked at that and I thought, there has got to be government money involved in this. This is a badge. If I am whatever it was, if in the old system, if it was a negative thing, a negative character trait, whether it was lust or gluttony or laziness or whatever, this is now turned into a minority. I'm now in a different spot. I now can claim privileges on the basis of my failures, and people say, "Well, you're not defined by your failures. You're still the best. God don't make no junk." So what we do is we flatter people instead of rebuking them. So the issue is this shuffling off or this evading of personal responsibility really is a problem, but that part of it has always been a problem. But we're dealing with an epidemic of it because we cater to it. We honor it when it happens.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about the whole victimhood culture thing and people adopting that mentality. And I've noticed a lot of people are confused as to why it would be appealing. But to me, that's quite obvious. I've thought about it quite a bit. I mean, as you said, there's a lot of social cachet in it. It can also be used as a weapon, as a cudgel against people you don't like, especially if you can attach some type of ism or phobia to it, particularly when it's not warranted. And also, it acts as a permanent alibi. So if you adopt that mindset, whichever one it is, it comes in a variety of flavors. And something I find quite interesting is no matter who you are and what demographic you are in, there's a narrative for you, right? So if you're a woman, then obviously, the patriarchy, male supremacy. If you are not white, if you're a black or if you're brown or whatever, then, it's the whole white supremacy and institutional, systemic and structural, every flavor of racism that's out there. And again, you don't need any evidence for this. Now you're even seeing, if you're on the other side of it, I'm starting to see people who are white saying that, well, no, actually, we're the ones being systemically discriminated against, and everything is DEI. And, the word DEI is now starting to be sort of overused to the point where I'm worried that it's going to get diluted in the same way that the left wingers diluted racism, and then they diluted white supremacy, and then they diluted far right, to the point where these terms are just kind of, you kind of shrug your shoulders and you're like, okay, you've kind of called everyone that now. So yeah, I don't want conservatives to start labeling everything everything they don't like as DEI or wokeness, because then those words just kind of won't mean anything.
The liberals, everything they didn't like was Hitler. If conservatives, everything we don't like is DEI.
So I'm really curious to know. I mean, you've seen so many changes in the USA over the last few decades. You've lived for decades prior to when I was born. So I'm curious, as someone who's not American, and as someone who didn't grow up in the States, and as someone who's younger, just what, how, and why have been the cultural shifts that have happened, say, over the last 50 years, say from the 70s up until now? Because I see big shifts from the 90s until now, or even from the 2000s until now. And I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective as a father, as a grandfather, as a great grandfather, as a pastor, as a leader in your community, how have you seen it shift in some major ways, and why do you think that that's happened? I know that's a huge question.
All right. Yeah. So let me go for the ultimate cultural why. I think I would trace our current social ills, basically, broadly speaking, across the West to Rousseau. C.S. Lewis once called Rousseau the father of the totalitarians. I think he was sort of like the origin of the rot and that moment. So that was the point where, if I were writing a history of what went wrong in the modern world, I would probably have the first chapter be on Rousseau. Now, of course, it's always Adam. There's always something before, something produced Rousseau. But, that's probably where I would start. In the American context, downstream from Rousseau, I would say all the monkeys got out of the cage in the sexual revolution in the 60s. So what happened was, I need to back up for a moment. I don't generally quote Nietzsche with approval, but he had in his book, The Birth of Tragedy, he argued that societies tend to swing from Apollonian rigor and tightness, the god of reason. They swing from Apollonian structure to a Dionysian structure. Dionysian would be kick out the jams. Everything descends into an orgy or a revel. So you have a tight-laced, straight-laced, buttoned-up Apollonianism, and the pendulum swings over to Dionysianism. Nietzsche's argument was that there was a moment where those two things fused in a weird sort of way, which gave us Attic tragedy. That was his argument. But I think you can see this pattern in cultures generally. So, for example, if you look at classical poetry, like Alexander Pope's poetry, where he wrote disciplined, tight poetry. He was a very great poet, but you could set a metronome to it. It was just disciplined and rigorous. Then after him, there was the reaction to that, which was the Romantics. The Romantics were let's let it all hang out. When I was a kid, I was born in '53, born in the Eisenhower years, and when I was a kid, America was a buttoned-up society. It was disciplined. It was tight. It was organized. It was everybody was on message. It was cohesive, right? It was cohesive, and then the first tremor. Basically, that was the Apollonian era, and then in the early '60s. 64, there was before them, there was Elvis, but the Beatles came to America in 64. And then by 68, all the doors were kicked down. And the whole late 60s sexual revolution with abandonment of traditional Christian values, free love, drug use, all of that. I don't think we've ever recovered from that. And so what happens is each absurdity sets the stage for the next absurdity. And so there's quite a distinction between first wave feminism in the 19th century and what's going on now. Feminism has gotten to the point where nobody knows what a woman is, right? It's sort of like, that's like the Navy not knowing what a ship is. What do you do? How did we get here? Well, it's a descent into madness. And the reason we're descending into this madness is because we don't acknowledge Christ. Christ is the center. Christ is the one in whom all things hold together. And that's why I'm fond of saying, and actually I have a small bumper sticker on my truck, this is Christ or chaos, basically. It's Christ or chaos. And because we attempted in the post-war consensus, we made a disciplined, rigorous attempt to govern ourselves without reference to God. And that Eisenhower era that I was born into and that I grew up in, where it was all disciplined and straight-laced, it was still godless. Right? We were well underway in the process of denying God and saying we don't need him and we can exclude him from education, and we outlawed prayer in schools and all of those things. I still remember praying in the government school, and that was struck down.
When was that struck down, just out of interest?
Oh, man, that would have been, I don't remember the year. It would have to be late 50s, early 60s, because I started going to school in like 58. And I still remember in first grade or so, the school day beginning with prayer. acknowledging God, and and so the court cases started pushing that out. We don't need God. We don't need God. And after we did that, the sky was still blue and the grass was still green and people still drove on the right side of the road, and everything seemed like, well, yeah, look at us go. We can do this. But it was a delayed reaction disintegration. One by one, things started to come apart, and so when the 60s happened, that was sort of the blast. Everything happened.
I hear so much about the 60s, and so many people point to that decade as to when things really just sort of blew up and started to invert in the West in a very leftwards cultural direction. I'm curious. Obviously, I didn't exist at the time, so I'm curious as to what it was actually like to live through that.
It was simultaneously disorienting and exhilarating. Okay, so I remember the first time I heard Christian music that had an electric guitar in it. Okay, it was like, whoa. Are they allowed to do that? Are they allowed to do that? Well, apparently so. And I think the record I was listening to was a group of nuns that were singing. This was right when the sexual revolution exploded. The Jesus revolution happened right alongside it, all mixed up with it. And there were a number of good things that came out of that, but in another sense, it was sort of participation along with it. So one of the mottos of evangelicals in North America appears to be, anything the world can do, we can do 5 years later and worse. And so there was this rush toward informality and let it all. We don't like labels. We don't like rules. We want to, and it really was the case and that included marriage covenants, and that included all sorts of things, and so consequently, a lot of damage was done at that time, but it didn't all happen at once. That's when we got the corruption. That's when the infection set in. And since that time, we've been getting progressively worse. Now, there have been movements to try to counteract that and to get back, and they've not been insignificant. They've done some good. We are in a major recoil against all of that now that has political repercussions. But even there, in the whole election of Donald Trump, there's basically there's a lot of chaos going on in the reaction to all the elements that are downstream from the late '60s. So we're still in the middle of the cafeteria food fight.
Yeah, we really are. It's weird, I'm a millennial, and I'm kind of glad I'm a millennial because I feel like I often feel bad for Gen Z, and then I don't know. I mean, I think I'm less concerned about Generation Alpha in some ways, but I kind of feel like Gen Z got the short end of many, many sticks and inherited a lot of mess that was set in motion before they or we as millennials were even born. And I think oftentimes I think a lot of older people, um, they don't realize just how much certain things have changed from when they were in their teens or 20s or 30s. They kind of run on the assumption that, oh, okay, well, it's just this, and I'm kind of like, no, especially if they're not especially if they're not heavily involved in the culture or social media and stuff like that. If they are, then they can tend to see it more. But a lot of people, understandably, they just don't really get it. So even when you're talking about things like, let's say, male and female relationships and dating and marriage and everything like that, like even people who have been married for 15 years don't realize just how much things have shifted and changed in people's behaviors and the culture and the media. The behaviors are just there's new terms for new behaviors that people weren't even aware of. Just like how 10 years ago people started making up new genders and new pronouns. There's just all of this new strange stuff, and then technology doesn't create it per se, but it enables it and it amplifies it and it accelerates it. So something which maybe in the past maybe it would have taken 40 or 50 years for a society to go through a certain shift, it can now happen in a decade. I mean, even if we just look at where things are now in 2025 compared to where they were in 2015, even compared to where they were in 2020. I mean, it was 5 years ago that the whole pandemic stuff kicked off. It doesn't seem like it, but it was 5 years ago. And it's like, are we living in the same world? So much stuff has changed.
And so the thing that I would tell Gen Z kids who are inheriting this mess, I would tell them, and Generation Alpha also, and they're saying, what am I supposed to do? I'm growing up in the shambles of a former civilization. I can read about these things in books or old movies. I can see bits and pieces in old movies. What should I do? I would say go for the root. True radical faith. Radical comes from the Latin word radix, which means root. So a radical is someone who goes to the root. And going to the root means coming back to Christ, right? Don't worry initially. Don't worry about clothing styles or musical styles or forms of entertainment or platforms that deliver you. Don't come to Christ and give yourself to Christ. If you're not a Christian, get baptized and start attending a faithful Christian church faithfully. Do that. And all the other things that need to be straightened out, and there are going to be a bunch of them, are going to start to be straightened out. The primal sin of the post-World War II generation, the primal sin was the attempt to govern ourselves without reference to God. And all this mess is demonstrating that it's not working out.
We do live in a truly strange time. I mean, what's your perspective of the way things are shifting now? I think that in the past year, there's been a very significant shift. And I think if the past decade was kind of defined by social justice, which then became what we collectively call wokeness, I think we're now at the sort of very beginning of perhaps a new decade and a new era. And I'm not quite sure what it's going to be defined by. There's definitely a lot of changes happening. There's a lot of shifts happening. And I don't think it's just political. I think it's also cultural. What's your read on that? Where do you think things are going?
Yeah, like you, I think it's still up in the air and it's difficult to see precisely where it's going to land. But I absolutely believe that faithful Christians have a clean opportunity during this time of churn. Basically, there are a lot of disoriented people who are willing to listen to alternatives. Like 20 years ago, if you had a radical suggestion for a radical understanding of living like a Christian, you'd have trouble getting an audience. Today, people are willing to listen, even if they don't buy what you're saying. They're gonna listen to you in a way that it wasn't possible to get them to listen before. And so I would say to Christians, pastors particularly, don't be shy about proclaiming Christ. Don't be shy about preaching the Word of God. This is the light that we need in a dark world.
Do you think that the right or the conservatives, I'm thinking particularly in the US, do you think there's going to be a fracturing in that camp in the same way that there seems to have been a fracturing in the left camp between what we could call sort of sane or moderate or classical liberals and then the sort of progressive, so-called progressive end, which pushed all of the weird ideas around whether it's race or gender or sexuality or transgenderism. And I think in the past decade, the left kind of split. And I wonder if the same thing is going to happen on the right along a different line. I could potentially see that happening.
Like the prophet Amos, I would say, I'm not a prophet. or the son of a prophet. I'm not claiming to have ability to see, but this is what I anticipate happening. I believe the progressive left has basically committed harry-carry. I think they've basically committed suicide, and they've not only split, but I think they've fallen to the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces. I don't see how they can recover from what they've done to themselves. So I think they're out. I think the Trump coalition really is a coalition that has there's a difference between allies and co-belligerents. An ally is someone who's fighting what you're fighting for the same basic reason. A co-belligerent is someone who's fighting what you're fighting for completely different reasons. So I think that so in World War II, Britain and the United States were allies. The United States and the Soviet Union were co-belligerents. We happened to be fighting Nazi Germany, but for completely different reasons. We were fighting them because we were enemies. They were fighting them because Hitler double-crossed them. Right? That was the problem. So Trump's coalition has both allies and co-belligerents in it. And I think that for reasons I don't have time to go into, the American constitutional system is a two-party system. It's not required to have two parties in the Constitution, but the way it's structured necessitates that. So from the very beginning, we've had Federalists and Republicans, and then we had, Whigs, and then but we've always had two. And so when one party cracks up, the Whigs cracked up, they were replaced by the modern Republicans, and then the modern Republicans basically became what the Democrats were, and the Democrats became what the communists were. But we always have two. So I would anticipate that the coalition that Trump has put together is at some point going to divide into two political parties, and one will be really conservative and the other will be centrist. So basically, I don't think the Democrats have the ability to come back to the center. I think they've done too much to themselves. But that center is going to be occupied, and I think it's going to be occupied by a portion of the current Republican coalition, and then so there'll be conservatives and centrists. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything that you're particularly hopeful for in the next few years, given the new administration?
Yes. There's I don't buy into every last detail of this, but there's a book that I really appreciated called The Fourth Turning. And I think we're in the middle of a fourth turning right now. And that's why it's so turbulent. And I think it's going to be a transformational time. And I think within 5 years or so, we're going to punch out of it and be in this the argument of the fourth turning is that basically societies age just like people do. And they go through, there's infancy and adolescence and middle age and old age. And there's certain characteristics of each one of these eras or each one of these periods of time. And I believe, so one of the things that keeps me encouraged is in the long run, stupidity doesn't work. In the long run, stupidity is not a strategy. And I think that we are reacting to a lot of stupidity all at once right now. And there's a lot of turmoil that's going on with it. And some of the reaction will be itself stupid. Not everybody reacts wisely and with modesty and decorum. But I think we're going to exit this period of convulsion in a few years. And so I'm generally optimistic about what's going to happen. So I just think everybody ought to keep their seatbelt buckled and remain in their seats for the time being. But I think we're going to get through.
I hope so, and I pray for that for all of my American friends and followers and listeners out there. Pastor Wilson, there is so much that I would love to talk to you about, but I want to be respectful of your time. For people who are listening, you would not be aware that we had half an hour of tech issues before we were able to even hit the record button. So I'm really grateful for your patience and for your wisdom. Before we close this one out, is there anywhere you would like to direct people to, or any message you'd like to give to people?
Sure. I would like to say thank you again for having me on. It's a great privilege. It's great to meet you. I've heard much about you, and there's been a very good opportunity for me. I really appreciate it, and would be happy to do it again sometime. So this is great. If the best place to go would be my blog. It's Blog and Mablog, and the address is dougwills.com. dougwills.com. And if you go to dougwills.com and unfold the front page, we built a portal to pretty much everything I'm involved with on the front page there. So New St. Andrews College and Logos School and Canon Press and all the different entities that I'm connected to, there's a way for you to go and find out what all that is. So dougwills.com.
And I look forward to checking out your most recent book, Keep Your Kids. I've got myself a copy, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor Wilson. Thanks for the gift of your time.